Consumer behavior standpoint, organizations, companies, nonprofits everywhere are having to adjust to the new expectations, the new needs and demands of their constituents or customers. The other piece around ways of working, which is going to be a big topic for us today when we talk about how organizations are transforming. If you look at a few of these facts, one of the really interesting ones on this chart shows a little bar chart over on the left-hand side, left-hand corner here. That's the number of downloads of Zoom, which happens to be the platform we're on today. By the way, I'm not advertising for Zoom. I am just pointing out an important point here, which is that in a matter of 5 days, towards the back end of March into early April, Zoom saw a download rate of 3.2 million downloads of its application. Why is that important? Well, it kind of relates to the key impact of COVID-19 on our ways of working, which is obviously the need for many of us to have gone into our remote working, flexible working format. And so the need for digital and this rollout of digital access to services right across every industry and domain has happened at such an unprecedented rate. If you think about school children learning from home 100% of the time for the last few months, those are things that many had always thought could happen. Some may have been in a years-long implementation of remote working and other things, but because of this pandemic, all accelerated into where we are today. So we're going to talk about those forces. Digital, as you can imagine, sits at the heart of a lot of what has transformed organizations throughout this crisis. So we will address the impacts of that, but we also really want to focus on those aspects of organizations and what they are doing to become more agile, more flexible and adaptable as we prepare for the post-COVID world. So if we go to the next chart, Jamie, this is just a bit of a sort of a placemat for you and a marker just to think about where your organization is today. So Korn Ferry works with thousands of organizations right around the world. When we think about our organizations here in Asia Pacific, Sharad and I have spoke to hundreds of clients literally over the last few months. And as we have done that, we've learned quite a bit about where organizations have started to see themselves on this quadrant, in this quadrant here. And so we measure that typically on sort of along the axis of agility, and that's the organizational agility piece, against the financial resilience. And again, because of the unevenness of the impact of COVID-19, organizations will find themselves in different places on this quadrant at different times throughout this recovery period. So it's an interesting place to kind of see yourself and to continue to revisit this as we talk throughout the day today.
Cynthia, if I could just build on that. I think you rightly mentioned the number of conversations we've had with our clients. We are kind of seeing three kind of buckets emerge, which are, I think, important for folks to understand. One, I think about 70% of our clients are essentially in the survive mode and looking at waiting and watching. About 20% of the clients through our research and folks we've spoken to are actually doing that, but are thinking about aspects around pivoting and what can they do differently at a bit of a step function level. And only about 10% are actually looking at doing both simultaneously. So walk and chew gum, which is I will survive and I will preserve, but I will look at disrupting in some ways. Now, I think each client has to look at where they are. What we've been advising clients is that waiting and watching is not a strategy at this time. There has to be some elements of execution around what can you start to do differently because this has been imposed on you, the point you beautifully made in the previous slides. That's an important frame that I guess folks have to understand which bucket are they in, and it's good to move to the right where you're at least doing something in the pivot and disrupting piece at this time, because that could get you ahead of the curve when it comes to competition.
Thanks, Sharad. That leads us. Thanks for that. Leads us nicely into this chart. And again, the key things, sort of building off of what Sharad just mentioned, is that when we have talked to organizations who are making that move and experimenting and adapting and really revisiting in a very frequent manner those things that tend to be working really well in this new world of work, we see three things that tend to become their focus. And these are three things that might have always been the case for many of your organizations, but might not have been. Purpose tends to be always at the forefront of all of our minds, but in this new COVID world and post-COVID world, purpose really becomes the new strategy. And what do we mean by that? I'm working with a really large retailer right now in the grocery or supermarket sector, and their purpose is to feed Australia. Very simple, isn't that? But when you think about what the supermarket sector has meant to markets all over the world, and particularly here in Asia Pacific, that purpose becomes the focal point of everything they do every day, and particularly as they adapt to the various new norms they have had to in that sector. So purpose is the new strategy, galvanizing behind that purpose, particularly in this new norm. Next would be obviously those priorities. And so those days of 5-year plans, 10-year plans, again, for many of you, you might have already tossed that particular way of working away long ago. But for those organizations who do think about planning and what that means now, what we do find certainly, and many organizations have told us this, is that behavior around planning has taken more of that priorities-based view and being able to work through those priorities as quickly as they can, learning from each of those events and then adapting and moving on. So again, planning is still an important thing to do, but the time horizons we are seeing shrinking from 5 years to more like 18 months. And so that's an important characteristic we're seeing in organizations who are transforming. And then lastly, I'll finish on this before we move into discussion. Organizational capabilities. We can't stress enough just how important it is that organizations continue to revisit those key capabilities that are core to your business, that are important for creating focus around your customer needs. And so when we talk about the impacts of digital, when we talk about the impacts of your industry on your business and what that might mean to changes in your business model, these organizational capabilities and that very laser focus on what those should be help you to create what we call this very distinct focus to see your way through this crisis, and again, ultimately to move you into those upper quadrants that we talked about earlier around pivoting and disrupting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And look, so we'll kick things off with a bit of a discussion. I think for a lot of people, digital transformation has been on the agenda for some time. And I think for a lot of organizations, COVID has, accelerated that transformation. For others, it may have paused some of those transformation efforts. Jana, as the CEO of a listed financial services institution, what kind of change and transformation are you seeing in your organization, and how has COVID impacted you and your clients?
Thanks so much, Jamie, and thanks for having me today. Moelis Australia is 11 years old, so unlike some of the other sort of behemoths of financial services companies, we don't have a huge number of sort of legacy systems that we're sort of grappling to move forward and digitally transform. So we were, frankly, a long way down the path of being completely digitised and native, in that we implemented a whole lot of tools like Microsoft Teams last year. Our challenge wasn't being able to move everyone at home. It was much more about the people behaviour aspects. We had Teams in place, but when you've got a high-performing workforce that actually works long hours and is already pretty savvy, they're often quite change-resistant as well, and getting them to adopt these tools is really hard. So for me, this whole work-from-home thing has been an absolute gift in terms of just the sort of behavioural change and the adaptation and the acceptance of these tools. I surveyed everyone last week, and 70% said that they were super excited with these digital tools that were available and wanted that to continue even as we return to the office. So it's actually been really positive in that regard. But what I would say is sometimes, or certainly in our experience, being remote highlights flaws in your processes. And I've always been a great believer that you've got to fix flaws in process before you can digitise processes. So that's been a really big part of what we've been doing, little micro projects of let's fix it. And it's just really intuitive to find the digital solution when you're all not sitting together anyway, because part of the problem is you kind of can't deal with the manual processes in the usual way. So that's actually felt relatively straightforward for us.
Yeah, look, I mean, fantastic. I mean, I think, what we've seen is it's sort of been a great equaliser to a certain degree. You know, when we had sort of cohorts of people in organisations that were partially working from home, post-COVID, everybody really now has been thrust into that. I mean, in terms of sort of the speed of transition, you sort of said most of your business was to a certain degree digitised already. Did you guys have plans in place for contingency and sort of how quickly did you sort of manage to move your workforce to 100% remote?
Yeah, so we obviously, like everyone, had a BCP. I'm not sure we had one that dealt with this particular scenario, but happily it wasn't that hard to adapt it. So for us, that was actually mostly about capacity testing, and that was actually just making sure that it would work when everyone was remote. So we did sort of a couple of weeks of that into the lead up of being at home. And equipment. So for us, it was mostly about, we've had a policy for a long time where people can have a home set up, so double screens at home and the full arrangement so that they can work from home, even though we don't have a workforce that does a lot of that. But we did need to then quickly scramble to make sure we had enough screens for everybody to have a double screen set up in their home office as well. But aside from that, we were pretty ready. The actual tools themselves were perfectly fit for purpose and ready to go. I just couldn't make change-resistant investment bankers use them until they had to.
And look, personally, I had to teach a lot of people how to use Zoom actually in the beginning of COVID. So we cleaned out a lot of our technological dinosaurs in a lot of in our organisation as well. Cynthia, what are you seeing? In your clients in terms of has this accelerated their digital transformation plans? Has it impacted them negatively? What are your clients telling you?
Yeah, look, when the first example that comes to mind is retail. And so I'm working with a couple of really large retailers here in Australia. And, by necessity, the projects, particularly around customer-facing applications and really going full digital on the e-commerce front were a necessity. So projects that were slated for 12 months, 18 month rollout, all of a sudden were happening in 2 months. Now, that doesn't mean full integration and everything is smooth. What it means, though, is adapting that agile mentality of, well, let's fix this one portion of the shopping cart. Let's roll that out in 4 weeks. If we don't, people will not be able to get their staple goods. Same thing with customer service. Rather than hiring thousands to man call centers, although many had to do that anyways, there was also a lot of use seen around AI and bots and being able to really accelerate the trust and being able to use your data to personalize those services. And again, so I think what I've seen is an acceleration. These were ideas. Some were progressed in the retail sector, but this particular event made it a necessity.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that we've got more discipline around scoping projects. So I think we're all really guilty of that scope creep where we go, well, we're doing this great thing, so let's add this and let's make sure it can do this. And suddenly the simplicity is like everything because you just want to get it done. And you're like, let's not waste this time and let's deliver it. So I think we've become absolutely to our benefit just so much better at saying what do we really need versus what would be nice to have, and let's just ditch the nice to have. It's 2.0. It's sometime in the future. Who cares?
Just get that core 80% of the value out of those projects. Now we've got a number of participants on the call from all across Asia Pacific and the globe. Sharaad, you run an Asia Pacific business. You're based in India, and I know what we've seen is obviously COVID's been a wave in terms of sort of how it's perpetuated through the region. I know India now is sort of getting the heavy burden of sort of COVID. What are you seeing in terms of the Asia Pac perspective?
Yeah, I think great question, Jamie. I think we are seeing about 2 or 3 specific kind of approaches, depending on where the country is and sector is. We're seeing a different kind of approach emerge from clients. So, for example, China is actually on the back end of it and is figuring out essentially COVID 2.0 and how they can accelerate stuff. Travel is back, clients are executing, shops are open. Overall, we feel there's a more positive trend in China. Now, within that space, there'll be industries which are stronger off. So, for example, pharma is feeling positive and doing better. Retail and airlines will still take time to come back. Healthcare had a bit of interestingly had a bit of a stop because it was only COVID-related stuff. Now it's coming back from a normal perspective. So, depending on the geography as well as the industry, we're seeing different aspects play out. What is common, though, is that across the board, what we are hearing in more than the 50 conversations I've had with CEOs and with management teams across the region and in fact even the globe, the fact is we need to accelerate digital because it's an imperative. It's not it could be a good to have or I need to do this today. It's an imperative. And the other realization is that digital and digital culture is actually not about technology. It's not just about e-commerce. It's actually not only about digital marketing and social media. It's those and plus other aspects, right? And what we are seeing very significantly emerge is there are smarter clients are breaking down the strategy into offense and defense and trying to do them both together. So what does it mean? In offense, I'm trying to use digital to capture an opportunity. Can I interact with my customers differently, look at augmenting sales and gaining market share? On defense, I need to survive to look at new consumer behaviors. For example, in pharma, a sales rep and a marketing rep which did a face-to-face interaction with a doctor is getting pushback saying, I would not meet you face-to-face. So they've had to shift completely in these 3 months to a completely virtual meeting pattern, right? In a very large CPG client I'm working with, they're figuring out using analytics to say, what can I send to my store owner with an exact SKU mix so that instead of 5 salespeople going, can 1 salesperson go there, right? So these are fundamental shifts in how people are using digital to try and address both defense as well as offense, right? And finally, I think it's very critical to understand that digital culture, as we like to call it, what is it? It's as you rightly said, and John very beautifully mentioned it. It's about the way you work as well as a shift in mindset. It's the way decisions are taken. It's the way information flows. It's the way you interact with each other, right? And we had done this research around 400 organization in 40 countries just pre-COVID actually. But interestingly, all those home truths of what makes up a great digital culture are so true today. And guess what? They are agility, There are transparency and openness. It's about empowerment and giving actually most of the decision making to the coal face, looking at discipline and focus, and then remaining connected, both with internal as well as external ecosystems, right? So if you put this all together, that's what digital is now meaning to a lot of clients. And it is, as I said, even in India, for example, where we're still trying to come out of, and we are about maybe a month and a half, 2 months behind China or the US or Europe, you would find that these aspects are taking root. China is accelerating. Japan is better off. Frankly speaking, Australia, we just had a discussion on. So I see a kind of a full